そして同時に私をある限界に制約し続ける。
それを証明することは不可能だ。
I guess today we're continuing my bend of trying to uncover if I'm human and have any value by overanalyzing anime, so of course we have to return to Ghost in the Shell, the 1995 cyberpunk darling, chock full of philosophical ramblings. In a futuristic world where cybernetics allowed the body to be pushed well past its limits, we see a question starting to arise. Am I human? It's from Major Motoko Kusanagi, a cyborg with a human mind who questions if she's actually human or simply believes she is, to Puppet Master, the criminal she chases, who turns out to be not so human themselves, but argues a strong case for why they should be. In their deepening interactions as the chase ensues, we see anything from memory to reproduction as the crux for humanity's value, eventually resulting in the genesis of mind to present a confident solution. Yeah, it's probably gonna be a weird one, so let's just get right into it. The Major is our point of reference for the entire series, so I believe it's best to analyze her character before we view the impact she and the world have on each other. Now, in narrative philosophical works, a major criticism is that the characters tend to be vessels for the concepts explored and not much more. Their personalities don't amount to much than following the lines of inspiration laid out by a particular theory. The easiest example is Fate Zero's version of Saber, the heroic spirit of King Arthur. All of her actions are guided by the traditional idea of a hero, and her quest is to retrieve the Grail to undo the fall of her kingdom. The other characters reason that it's a foolish quest. After all, if it fell under her leadership, what good would bringing it back with the same ruler do? Ryder, Gilgamesh, and others present different takes on what it means to be a leader, with Saber acting as the platform for the theories to have impact, contrasted against the traditional failed ideal. Ura Butcher makes some fantastic series, with Fate Zero being one of them, but it is the most that his characters have ever felt like readings of a philosophical text. I bring this up because Ghost in the Shell is a work with this kind of feeling. The plot is really just a series of simple actions joining together philosophical ramblings and questionings. Now, the Major is mostly the side of questioning, and we see very little of her which is not representative of this crisis of self. Start with her room, or at least what we're shown of it. Nothing. We get 3 angles of it, and everything is blinded by the light coming in from her window. In the wider shot, all we see of her is her silhouette, devoid of any detail. Similarly devoid is her time spent here. She looks out of the window for a moment, gets dressed, and leaves. There's no breakfast, no coffee, no time spent browsing, nothing. Normally, we get some insight into a character from their room. It's a great way to do unspoken development. 91 Days, Avilio is developed as a man with no reason to live, by his definite lack of possessions or decoration of any kind, distinct from here because the Major could have these things, but we're completely unaware of them if so. It's not that there's nothing, it's that we don't even know if there's something. Now, Mikado's room from Durarara is clearly dingy and sparse, adding to his development of leaving behind a comfortable life for excitement. Naota's room in Fully Cooley invokes the idea of his absent brother, as he keeps everything in the exact state it was left within. These specifics help to provide insight into the characters, but here in Ghost in the Shell we have nothing at all, and so nothing to go on. And from this, we go right to her on the job, which is most of our time spent with Major Kusanagi. Her first expressed thoughts are about her team's selection, showing a careful consideration of how to get the best results from her work, completely discarding any of her personal feelings from the matter of who she'll be spending most of her time alive with. In the opening sequence, we see her expose herself, dive off a building, and commit murder for the mission, clearly marking how far she'll go for the purpose of this work. And to further one of those points, she has minimal care at all for who sees her in what state, likely extending into her entire presentation. This body, which we see multiple of in the anime, isn't an expression of her personality or choices, but rather simply the one she has. Any would do if it could perform the necessary actions. Now, one of the reasons she's naked so often is for her optical camouflage. She can turn invisible at a moment's notice to sneak up on her foes and land the perfect strike or whatever it calls for. And this feels like the downright perfect ability for her, doesn't it? She fades away into her surroundings, nothing more than a phantom carrying out the orders of Division 9. Nothing but the purpose she was given this body and this power for. There's so little to her you would be forgiven for seeing right through. Now, we do get a glimpse into her off time, and even one of her hobbies, diving. Despite having a cyborg body, one without the buoyancy of a human, she goes into the water with floats, risking the fact that if they malfunction, she would have no way to save herself. This has some interesting implications we'll get into, but let's look at the rest of her night first. When she comes back up, it appears what she does with the remainder of her time is waiting. She drinks, but implants can kill off any effects of alcohol in seconds, meaning she's always ready for duty still. On the water with a quiet contemplation, she thinks about herself and life, waiting for the next call to action. Her time is spent idly. It's not the kind of activity of someone with a true sense of self, but rather someone seeking out one, wondering who they are and why, and if they even exist. I brought up vessels for ideals as characters because the Major is an interesting use of this concept. She isn't developed to be a traditional hero or the spirit of the law, but rather she's left blank to explore the very concept of self by not really having one. The development of her character is simply an identity crisis, someone struggling to prove their own worth and more, their own existence. She isn't a person, but rather the image of one. She looks like one, talks like one, sleeps like one. But is she actually one? Or is this all just mimicking a human? Starting with the physical aspect. As a cyborg, she sees other versions of herself or other entities with her face, presumably with her voice as well. Some look at her, some act as mannequins in stores, adding to this crisis. And it's rather an ironic note, as earlier she mentions these specific aspects, like a face and a voice, as markers of the self, a defined being, how we distinguish ourselves from others, and she doesn't even seem to fully have that. And then, as she and Bato muse on, their bodies themselves are tied to Division 9, to their work. The implants they have aren't actually their own, but more like leases from their work. If they leave, their bodies leave with them, meaning who they are physically depends on this job. You can see why her situation lends itself to a crisis of self. But there are other, more important aspects of the self, surely, so let's not dwell on the body alone. After all, her mind, who she is and wants to be and thinks she is all part of herself, and that exists within whatever the container is. Presumably. An exchange between her and Bato highlights some doubt here. How does she actually know that her brain is a human brain? She hasn't seen it. In fact, everyone goes through life with the assumption they're human because they have a human brain. But there's no way to prove, while still alive and by yourself, thus eliminating the possibility of being lied to or tricked, that you actually have a human brain. Sure, now we have scans and imaging technology which can see ours, but those, as we said, could be faked, or say the processors we're actually running on could be hidden within something to make it look like a brain from the outside. I know it sounds like some wild conspiracy theory stuff, but the idea is this underlying assumption isn't enough to actually prove anything. So what about the functions of whatever is controlling our body then? Our emotions and our memories and our dreams. These all act as a sort of bundle with the Major, centering around the title sequence. We witness the birth of a cyborg with her physicality, which appears ready to awaken just as we see her do the same. But despite the ordering of this, there is no confirmation whether this is a dream or a memory. Is she reliving her creation or creating it in her mind? It's likely she doesn't know either, and I think we can see this in her hobby. When she floats back up to the surface, it appears to mimic aspects of this scene, in addition to the warmer colors which provide a much more human feeling to it. It seems she's going over what details of this idea she can, seeing if the stimulus she receives appears to be that of recollection or of imagination. If it feels familiar, we might have a memory. If it's new, then it's probably simple dreaming. Now, either way, this does prove some sense of self though, right? Memories, a focus of the anime, form the basis of humanity on the individual level. The knowledge we learn, the emotions we feel, how we act, and who we want to, all of these things rely on memory. They're built on the premise of taking information from our surroundings, committing it to our mind, and then using that to further lay out our thoughts, feelings, and interactions. In short, who we are. And imagination is something wildly human and valuable. Even if she's just concocting this memory from thin air, that means her mind is being illogical, acting on emotions rather than rationale. We see this as well with her dives, as she mentions fear as the chief emotion she gets from them. What sense does inducing fear make? Having it make sense, but purposefully inducing it? It doesn't make sense. But to feel such things is typically seen as being human. Given her usually stoic demeanor, proving herself that she can be afraid of death is one way of confirming she is alive with value. Why else would she fear not being alive? Now, this is where we get into the trippier side of these issues. Memory and imagination are all good, but are they even real? Can they prove us if we can also doubt them? Let's jump back to the beginning to check this out. In the birth scene, we see this scan of a brain, but if it's inside of this body, it's within a mechanical shell, and there's no confirmation of that. It could be a digitized consciousness uploaded to these electrical elements, raising even more questions which push us to the emotional pleas of humanity. If she's defined by memories, which then define her emotions and dreams and interactions and knowledge and so on, then if they're uploaded, this should be fine. It's exactly the state her brain was in, which was making up her. It is her, right? Well, we don't really know because consciousness is such an abstract concept. It could just be a copy of her, one which acts and thinks the same way because it's processing the same data, but technically is a different awareness, a different consciousness, simply believing itself to be Motoko Kusanagi. Where does this self specifically end? Does it appear anywhere the data which compromises us is stored, whether man or machine, or does it arise from our birth and die with our body? We don't even have a way to disprove that our consciousness ends each night when we fall asleep, and what appears the next day is a copy of it with the same memories, thus believing itself to be a continuation. And even then, how do you know that your memories are your own, even aside from all of this? One of these subplots of the movie is how Puppet Master manipulates the memories of their puppets. These two we see suffer from different takes on this issue. The one who seems to be in charge has lost any sense of the identity he once had, acting out orders that simply feel natural to his manipulated mind. He believes this plan is his own, even though he has no reason for actually doing it. The Major and Bato catch him asking personal or emotional questions like, "What's your mother's name?" and we witness as he realizes that he has no answers. These are things he hadn't considered until they were mentioned. Until someone made him remember he forgot, he had no idea that he didn't know. Yes, that was a terrible sentence. But more emotional is the worker that we see. He has a very strong sense of self, acting out his emotional desire concerning his separated wife and their young daughter, which he boasts about to his coworker. However, when he's brought in, Division 9 has the tough task of showing this man that none of these things are actually real. He's just a bachelor living in a crappy apartment. He tries to argue against their points, saying things like, yeah, okay, he does live there, but he got that after they were separated. But then they have records that show he's been living there for years, that he was never married. His mind has been subtly altered, leading him to take actions in Puppet Master's favor, all the while believing it to be his own will. And so we see the fragility of memory. We think of it as something solid, like a video replaying what happened and when, but really it's a loose collection of impulses being refired in our brains to simulate the previous experience. I talked about that more on my video in cyberpunk anime though, so check out that one for more detail. What we see here today is that memory is just data, much more subjective and easy to influence than some objective storage. And then even if it was, someone could still just overwrite or change the data. And we're left in the dark, crying at a photograph that proves our memories wrong. He went about his days with no idea that his sense of self was entirely false. And if the lie had been a bit better, would he have ever known? Now, maybe then the reaction, the tears, is where the value comes from. Just like Kusanagi, if we can prove to ourselves that we still feel, then who we are is important and valuable to some degree. Yes, biology may say that emotions are simply chemicals in the brain, but if we still experience them in what feels like a higher plane, then we have some connection to such a thing, right? Well, it's possible. Emotions can be described as a trick, the brain inducing a strong reaction for the purposes of fulfilling some basic goal. Fears for survival, heartbreak for continuing the species, and so on. Everything we feel could technically be tracked back to some goal, and so what we're feeling is nothing more than evolution's trick at getting us to act the most strongly of any animal so far. And this goes deeper. Consciousness itself is a very odd thing. We think about sight as seeing what's directly in front of us, like we're peering out from holes in our head. But really what's happening is our eyes functioning like sensors, turning visual impulse into electrical signals, which travel to our brains, where they're reconstructed into what we consider as sight. There's a lot of guesswork in this, and often shown by optical illusions, which basically trick our brains into seeing something that isn't. Our brain interprets these mixed signals as what makes sense given our traditional reason, the conditioning we receive to interpret these signals, and so we see things that aren't there. What's happening is that we simply need to be convinced of reality. It doesn't actually have to be real, we just need enough stimuli which pair with the criteria for an experience, and we feel it. It's like having a paintbrush rubbed on a rubber hand and you start to feel it because it looks like a hand and is where your hand should be. Reality isn't so real, and this compounds even further. Since we're all living within our own heads, reconstructing the world around us to our own perception, how can you prove to me that I exist? How can I prove that you exist? We're forever trapped by our own perspective, doomed to be somewhat aware, but never quite certain. It seems like maybe we should all be having a crisis of self like the Major. The quote that stands out to me the most from her is, "The only thing that makes me feel human is the way I'm treated." Whether people actually exist or not, this may be the only validation we can receive. Let's assume they are for a moment, that there is a ghost within the shell, that is, that there is a soul. What is a soul without a body? Where does it exist? Who can see it? When and where? If it truly is something from a higher plane or some other dimension or heaven or hell, is it floating around there with other souls bumping into them? I think given our perception is limited to ourselves, the answer may be something like they exist in their own space. Without eyes or ears, they cannot see or hear. Without limbs and nerves, they cannot reach or feel. They are there in full and with the value they hold in us, complete but unobserved. There is nothing they can do to prove their own value. Limitless and free, they are also confined to an eternal indetermination, never aware of where they stand or why. A body could be the solution to this. By being bound to a form, it gains everything which was lacking, like the ability to express its abstract being, a way to be observed and thus to show itself to others, be validated and proven. However, it's also confinement. As the Major expresses, "I have a face and voice to distinguish myself from others, but my thoughts and memories are unique only to me. I collect information to use in my own way. All of that blends to create a mixture that forms me and my conscious." But she ends with the line, "I feel confined, free to expand myself within boundaries." Those boundaries may be where the soul finds the ends of the body. Because expression really is a weird thing, isn't it? If we were fully realized beings, would we have any need to wear specific clothes or have a certain hairstyle or even look a certain way at all? To speak a certain way, to express that we read a certain book or like a certain thing and then find parts of ourselves in those and express it to others, it's all this act of trying to prove who we are. It's like there's something within us desperately seeking to make itself known, bursting out in whichever ways it can within the confines of physicality. The soul, if it exists, is likely greater than the body, but in needing to be witnessed creates a contradiction. The physical realm can never express it in full, so even though it is now finally witnessed, it struggles desperately to be seen and validated in true. As the Major says, free to expand within boundaries. This offers a potential line. Maybe if we can break those boundaries, we can cease to struggle. Puppet Master presents an answer to this, but first let's look at how they generally answer a crisis of self and the question of value. At first glance, we may feel like Division 6, scoffing off the program's ability to think and feel, claiming it as nothing more than the result of coding for the sake of survival. After all, if some lines of code could give rise to the level of human beings, then wouldn't we be devalued? If code could be us, then maybe we're just nature's code, chemicals acting as ones and zeros, controlling us based on hyperspecific and complex loops and conditional statements buried in DNA. But isn't it just as true that a code gaining awareness, possibly even a soul, could show us the truth of one? Maybe the soul is granted spontaneously to beings who are worthy of one, and the fruits of our labor that we created are worthy of one. This would detach the soul from the body and seem to say that we are actually more than code, even though we can be on level with it. I think this shows why the Major chases Puppet Master to such an extreme extent, even going to the length of destroying her own body to get to that point. If this program has become sentient, then it can provide an answer to her question. Solving the mystery of Puppet Master is also solving the mystery of whether it even matters to be human or machine. Her crisis could be solved by determining neither one matters, and that instead something greater can exist within anything, any one of us. The answer is there, or so it seems. It's really more like the potential for it. We see that Puppet Master themselves was moved to use their physical form for physical means. They had to have a body before they could claim the rights of a living being, whether they were respected or not. The act of observation is still important to some degree. If one is only code, then they'll never be able to enforce their humanity unless others also arise from code. The container cannot be escaped. We have a sort of paradox. We see man trying to achieve the status of machines and machines trying to achieve the status of man, each searching for what the other lacks, as Puppet Master seeks death to confirm life. It seems that what isn't held will always be what's needed, and that neither humanity nor technology can perfectly fit the expression of a soul. We are confined either way to bodies or to solitude. But there may be one option left: Ascension. I think in the discussion of whether a machine can ever achieve human status, we miss something important. Those machines are the fruits of our labor as humans, which would be rising above us. Something which can think and feel as we do, act irrationally as we do, but also connect to anywhere and everywhere, calculate far beyond our capacity in a fraction of the time, store much more with more accuracy than we could ever hope to. As they explain, life has grown more complex. Humanity has underestimated the consequences of computerization. In the same way that we seem to have surpassed our maker, that is nature, by exiting from the usual processes of it, maybe our machines will surpass us by exiting the usual processes of programming, of the limitations we place on them. This is a form of great change, tying in with something else they say. Kusanagi fears for her sense of self when Puppet Master says they should merge into one being, to which they respond, "Your effort to remain as you are is what limits you." This isn't strictly about changing in a personal sense, but rather on the whole. Have we considered the next step of our evolution possibly being created by ourselves? Maybe nature has reached its limits with us, and we must do the rest. After all, in the fight against the spider tank, the idea of traditional evolution is literally destroyed. The fossils on the walls and the tree of species shot by the fruits of human engineering, as if to directly say, this is the next step. Maybe it isn't a threat to us. Puppet Master is a terrifying entity, but they needed the Major as much as she needed them. They sought her out specifically, seeing something in her as being valuable and necessary for their own ideals. Neither man nor machine independently won the day, but together they may have. The Major and Puppet Master do merge, giving rise to a new being, one which can observe itself since it was formed from two consciousnesses, and with the ability to escape into a larger network, thus free from the confines of a strict body. The mixture of their consciousnesses awakens, leaves behind Bato, who rescued them, and heads out into the world with a new confidence and passion. They overlook the city, ready to insert their being into the world around them, becoming both more observed and reproducing as puppet masters so craved as a status of life. Are they both still alive in there? Is this just an adjusted form of the Major who talks with Bato because she is her, or because her memories make her think she is her? Well, we can't tell, and she probably can't either, so does it matter? Either way, she's moving forward as who she is right now, and as far as we can observe, with a sense of self. Doesn't this ending solve all of the issues which were presented as holding us back here? They're observed at all times, first by each other, and second by their presence within a collective network. The sharing of their thoughts directly prevents them from being alone inside of their own minds, and thus the soul needs no validation from the body, and perception has become a non-factor. Their memories are stored and shared across multiple areas, making them less likely to be tampered with and providing a better source for accurate recollection. Our memories are their memories, and theirs ours. And the need for expression is solved in such direct and immediate communication. There is no more misunderstanding or interpretation caused by the transition from mind through the body to the body of another and then into their mind. We need not express who we are physically, we simply communicate it directly in such a technological, communal state. The soul is no longer confined by what the body can say of it. This might be the perfect solution. So, what would really be holding us back from something like this? In all the discussion of how much of our humanity we could lose from machines, are we missing the possibility that they could enhance the soul? The technology we see is the fruits of our labor, the drive to make the future real. As the Major expresses, like it's damn near instinctual, we advance into the darkness, uncovering a future which is not yet known for the sake of doing it, because it is what drives us as a species. Do we ask science why it tries to uncover the mysteries of the universe? Or do we just accept it because it's our habit as humans? We survive and better ourselves through tools and our minds. They've always helped us overcome physical bounds, so why not now, especially if it is so instinctual? Technology is just the next level of these tools we create. Are we held back by the idea of the body, by the fear that a digitized consciousness may not be our own, but simply another which believes it is us? One which, if asked, would say that it is, and so every cyberization is a leap of faith. I'll have no answer here, and we likely never will. For all my lofty talk of the soul and mind, I still find something about the body and its limitations to be so human. The way we are forced to express and communicate ourselves within boundaries is what leads to fashion, to art, to music, attempts at taking something we feel and presenting it to the world in a pleasing or even painful way. If you saw the last video, you know how strongly I feel about art in that way. Would we still do such things if we were connected at all times, expressed in full to others? Would that be worth losing art and cooking and fashion? Would that be worth losing the fantastical way we read into the touch of someone we love, the placement of a hand, and how much of their breath we can feel? Something about our confinement feels so core to us, so hopeful for our ability to be amazing despite all the odds. But then there is a validity to the counter as well. We can see the internet as almost like a proto-collective consciousness. From anywhere and everywhere we can log on, spread our thoughts and react to others, meet people, grow and change with them as we form communities, all accessible at any moment for better or worse, pulling from the same sources of information. Perhaps the evils of the internet we see are a result of this half measure we're currently in, where the disconnect between our increasingly collective minds and independent bodies is shown in full through addiction, anger, jealousy, and the other negative emotions of our social comparison, which might cease to be if we were on a more totally connected level. The way our perception of reality is changed by technological advancements shows the power that it has. The barrier between fact and fiction dissolves a little bit more each day, it seems. We begin to ignore the worries of flesh for the pleasures of the mind. We're fooled by what we see, and in turn, what we want to see. But none of these issues exist without the independent containers for our brains. Now, I want to leave this thought with some context though. I think it is foolish of us to look to future advancements to solve the issues which have persisted through many prior ones over many years. We've had societal booms over the course of human history, yet we still face some of the most basic issues like inequity and hunger, despite having the power at our fingertips to solve them. If we couldn't do that in the past 200 years with every advancement, why would our next one suddenly do so? Such thinking is downright foolish, and I would almost say that we don't deserve some kind of genesis of the mind into technology until we prove worthy of the benefits such a thing would bring. We must solve the issues of the flesh and witness it at its highest potential before we decide that it is discardable. And we must do that for everyone. Whether we are machines of biology or technology, we'll likely never be sure. What consciousness is, what value is, who will ever know? So I think we must act as if we hold the best possible case, that we are valuable creatures deserving of respect and love. Breaking through uncertainty with hope may be naive, but what other choice do we have? A positive path will provide us the best advancements. But anyway, that was a wild ride through some ideas of the soul and body and mind and different things that came up through Ghost in the Shell. Hopefully it was good. Hopefully it made you think. There's obviously not a lot of certainties when it gets into these very abstract matters, but I think the value of dissecting these questions is to make us think about ourselves, and usually the solutions we find personally will show us our own value, what we care about, different things like that. So I like these unanswerable questions as a means for introspection and thinking about the world, different things of that nature. But I can feel myself starting to ramble because I'm well off script, so I'll just say there's important links in the pinned comment, Discord, Twitter, most importantly Patreon, where lovely people above me support me right now and help me keep making mad stuff like this for the internet. But anyway, thank you to all of you for being here and spending some time with me, and I'll say thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon.